And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Hi everyone, and now for your marine forecast. Meteorologist Joel Curtis here with the forecast issued Thursday, April 3rd. Let's start out with our sea ice edge. Taking a look at it, what the ice forecasters just told me was that in this northeasterly section toward St. Matthew and toward St. Lawrence Island, expect the ice edge to retreat toward the northeast. However, the southern sections, like south of Nunivak Island, for example, that ice is probably going to advance a little bit toward the south. So this is reflecting the circulation that's going on right now with the wind in Bering Sea. So for tonight's weather, got this stationary front that originates from a 974 millibar low south of Kodiak Island. This stationary front has a lot of precipitation associated with it, particularly on the west side where the cold air is. However, you'll notice too that there's a real good surface pressure gradient which is driving the wind over the Gulf of Alaska as well, and quite a frontal system well to the south. So we've got a warm front approaching Haida Gwaii, and then the occluded front is a station that comes ashore about Unimak Island or so for a triple point in that area. Then we have a 1,027 millibar high in the far western Bering Sea and a 1025 millibar high to the north. Now what this evolution of this is that Friday, that front really stays stationary that goes up into the central interior. And note all the precipitation, also the strong pressure gradient that's crossing over the Pribilofs, Nunivak Island, and down into the eastern Aleutians. In the meantime, we've got a lot of easterly component on the wind going into the Gulf of Alaska, and that's out ahead of the front, which is really kind of weak. I've depicted the warm front south of Haida Gwaii as more or less falling apart. It's really hard to get to see how strong that front is, but one thing's for sure is that there's plenty of pressure gradient out there, as you'll see in the marine forecast. Then for Saturday, the stationary front is still going on, but a 995 millibar low has formed up into the central interior. And then the occluded front has moved over to about the Bristol Bay area with the triple point right in that area. And then the frontal system is still, the warm section of it is still really, really weak. But again, plenty of surface pressure gradient to drive southeasterlies into the Gulf and lots of fetch. So the sea state there is going to be pretty good. And then on the backside, those northerlies still persist that hit the Alaska Peninsula, the far eastern Aleutians down from Nunivak Island, and even some in Norton Sound. So let's start with our forecast. First of all, for southeast Alaska on Friday, the inside waters ranging 10 up to 25 knots, seas 5 feet and clearance feet straight, otherwise seas about 3 feet. And then easterly component on the winds ramping up from gale force 35, a little bit of 25 off of Baranof Island, and then ramping all the way up to a whole gale, 45 knots, and seas 23 feet off of Cape Suckling. So the seas have already built up on Friday, and then when you look on Saturday, those seas are holding or maybe dropping off just a little bit. Still some gale force, 30 to 35 knots, 35 knots up by Cape Suckling, 35 knots down off of Cape Omni, and down off of Dixon Entrance as well. Still pretty good seas, but now a lot of that will be at least a young swell, if not a full swell that's coming out of the southwest. In the meantime, on the inside waters, you got 30 knots in clearance straight, driven by more of that pressure gradient, but only 15 knots as you get further north, seas 8 feet in clearance straight. So for south central, we've got whole gales to 45 knots on the outside, and they tend downward a little bit as you get down to Kennedy Entrance or so. In Cook Inlet, northeasterlies 30 knots, 35 knot easterlies off of, over to Augustine Island, and then for Prince William Sound, 35 knots, seas 9 feet with a pretty good fetch distance straight across the sound. And then for Saturday, again, holding on to those gales off of the south central. That low didn't go much of anywhere, and the pressure gradient is very slow to ramp down. So we got 30 knots of easterly, seas 6 feet in Prince William Sound, 40 to 45 knots on the outside water, seas well into the teens. And then for Cook Inlet, 25 to gale force 35 knots and 40 knot northeasterlies, seas 11 feet down off of Augustine Island, and 45 knots coming through Kennedy Entrance. So what's that going to do? That's going to shape up at least gale force in Chillicothe Strait, 35 knots, seas 9 feet. And then we've got easterly component until you get down to off of Sand Point, where it's just about a straight north wind, and not so much. Why? Because it's kind of like right behind the front, and the wind still hasn't felt the full power of the low that's well to the south of Kodiak Island. In the meantime, on the Bering Sea side, small craft advisory 25 knots, seas ranging 6 to 11 feet. But then on Saturday, you can see those easterlies really pounding up toward Kodiak Island, 25 knots, but 15-foot seas, and that's that swell that I was talking about. You can get a southeast swell over on that side of the Gulf, and 10 feet in Chillicothe Strait, 11 feet down off of Chignik and Sand Point, northwesterlies down off of False Pass, seas only 5 feet, not much fetch distance there, and the wind has toned down a little bit because that front's just been hanging around and weakening a bit. 20 to 25 knots, seas up to 9 feet where you have a decent fetch off the ice edge. Okay, for the Aleutian chain, whole gales on Friday, 45 knots out of the north on the Bering Sea side and also the Pacific side, seas up to 22 feet off of Nikolsky, 20 feet to the south. And then you can see some westerly component working its way in as for Atka and Adak waters, and seas 10 to 15 feet or so. And then kind of a mixed bag, 15 to 25 knots as you get further out the Aleutians with a very much reduced sea. And then on Saturday, the winds are ramping down. You still have gale force in the east, 35 knots, seas 17 feet off of Nikolsky on the Bering Sea side and 15 feet on the Pacific side. And then 30 knots in the central Aleutians, seas ranging 7 to 12 feet. And then as you get further out the Aleutian chain, now the wind is starting to feel a little bit of a system to the southwest. And so you've got easterlies 25 to 30 knots and seas up to 12 feet. So for the west coast, northerlies continue on Friday, 30 to 35 knot gales. And of course, you're over the ice, so there's no sea state. And then for Saturday, you've got generally brisk wind, 20 ranging up to 30 knots over the ice, seas 4 feet out by St. Matthew Island, and a gale force still for the Pribilos, 35 knots, seas 15 feet. So for the Arctic coast, a bit of a mixed bag, but you start out with polar easterlies along the north slope, ranging from about 15 knots up to 25, and then down through the Bering Strait, you're ranging 20 to 25 knots, a little bit of 15 right there at the strait entrance, and then 25 to 30 knots as you get further south of the Bering Strait. And then for Saturday, a solid 20 knots of polar easterlies all along the north slope, and then the wind reduces in the Chukchi Sea about 10 to 15 knots or so, and then as you get further south of the Bering Strait, 20 knots over the ice. So that's it for your marine forecast. If you're going out there, please let somebody know what your float plan is, and please stay very safe out there with this active weather. Thank you.